everybody. I am so glad that you have joined us for the Alchemizing Trauma for Community Impact series. You are a part of the Be Well Beautiful People podcast, which is all about ensuring that we are centering healing and liberation above all. Today's episode is part of the series that we're doing with incredible leaders from Detroit that are doing really impactful work. We'll be sharing their stories and how they have transformed individual along with community trauma for the greater good of themselves and for the greater good of the people that they get to serve every single day. And I have the privilege of being in the studio with Bryce Detroit, which you're going to hear about in just a minute. This series is being sponsored by the Love Building, H&B Services, and the Lit Bar. So one of the things that I want to share with you before I talk a little bit about Bryce, that music has the power to help us bounce back. It literally helps us to be more resilient. It helps us to go harder on workouts. I don't know about y'all, but when I'm jamming out to my music, I seem to go a little bit harder. And it even can improve stress, lower cortisol levels, and increase oxytocin levels. Yes, those hormones that make us feel happier. And one of the beautiful things is that expressive art therapy is one of the things, particularly music, that can replace psychological resources or emotional resources. And even though this brother right here just doesn't focus on music, right? That's one of the main things that he does, along as being an amazing cultural curator. And so if you don't know about this brother, you are about to get to know him intimately. Bryce Detroit is a multimodal, Afrofuturistic artist, an activist, a griot, and a pioneer of entertainment justice. He's an award-winning music producer and curator, and he uses his social practice to advance new diasporic African narratives and cooperative neighborhood economies. He's the founding member of Oakland Avenue Artist Coalition, Detroit Community Wealth Fund, Frontline Detroit, and he's also a consultant for the Center for Community-Based Enterprise.
Yes.
In addition to that, he's board member for East Michigan Environmental Action Council, and I'm sure there are many other roles that this brother plays, and we're going to be getting into today. But before we do that, and we explore this intersection of how entertainment and cultural activism can transform community into being one of empowerment, we are going to ground into this Nigerian proverb. When the music changes, so does the dance. Bryce.
Ashe.
What up, though?
What up, though?
Listen, I've been practicing my what up, though.
That's what's
How
up,
does it sound?
Demarra.
Am I doing all right?
You do it. It's like, you know what I mean? Like 6.5 to 7 out of 10. You know what I mean?
You keeping it real with me, right? I need some practice.
A little bit
okay,
more.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well, you know, I only been here 5 months.
That part.
Okay.
And we're happy to have you.
And I'm so glad to be here, right?
Indeed.
Because Detroit is dope on many levels. You know this.
Absolutely.
And we're going to be talking about exactly why you in part make it dope.
Ashe.
Right? And the work that you do. Ashe. That's my word, too. Did you know that?
There we go.
One of the ways we in sync.
Boom.
Boom, boom,
That's the diasporic African
hey,
right there.
Yes. I love that. Well, let's get into it. So you work as an Afrofuturistic artist and a griot. Many people probably don't even know what griot is.
So, boom. Griot is a French term for storyteller.
Yeah.
Now, the African word for griot is jolly or jelly. Some spellings of it Jheli, some Jeli.
Yeah.
The short story, though, it is the griot, the jelly. We are responsible for carrying the legacy of our ancestry, bringing it forward in the now to be able to communicate and convey the ancestral points of identity, lifestyle, brilliance, bring all of that information in the now so that it can support us now projecting how we want to actualize in the future.
Yeah.
So it's really Sankofa. Yet that is the ancestral indigenous role of the griot or the storyteller.
Yeah.
It is, we are the walking cultural institutions. We're the libraries for the living culture, living material culture, and it's us bringing ourselves to the people to share this information, especially at a time when we know people have been disconnected from the information. And it's in this legacy information, it's in this ancestral literacy that allows us to actually be operating from, we can use the word proper, we can use the word healthy, we can use the word authentic, original, points of self.
Yeah.
Yep.
What I love about this is like it's not just about telling stories so that we know where we came from. It's really about ensuring that you're promoting the ways of being as well.
Yes.
And that storytelling with this idea that it's important for people to know where they came from, not for the sake of knowing, but for the sake of carrying out the richness of where we came from, of who we really are at our core.
Period.
And a lot of that has been forgotten. So I love that you carry that identity so tenaciously, and it shows up fiercely within your work. And we're going to be talking about a lot of that fierceness in just a little bit. So tell us exactly, like, what do these identities mean to you, right? You broke it down to help us to really understand contextually what that is.
Yep.
But how does Bryce Detroit embody this day in and day out?
Boom. So first for me, on my own road work, on my own life journey, let's take it back to 2011. This is me already like 4 years into this particular spiritual discipline. Shout out my ancestors. Now, for me, my way of phrasing or framing my own spiritual process at that particular time, starting in 2007, was this is me cultivating my ancestral identity. Another word, ancestralizing. Like, this is me ancestralizing myself. By 2011, the imperative for rooting more deeply in my ancestral literacies was like very in my face, because this is me 2 years at that time, 2 years into social justice, environmental justice, climate justice, as an entertainment artist though. So it's me coming from this place, which gave me a unique optic, and am present in this movement space now, which in Detroit is very much informed by the Black liberation movements. It's like our social justice movements, climate justice movements, all of those build out of these Black liberation movements coming out of the top of the 20th century. One of the first expressions of a Black liberation movement was the labor movement in Detroit. So boom, it's me in this space, hearing the messaging, being present in the campaigns, supporting the frontline activism. And one thing that just kept popping out to me is the point of identity that my people who are showing up on the front lines, the people who are doing this work, people are coming to they're approaching this work from the point of identity of the victim, from the point of identity of the oppressed. Now, one who feels that they are oppressed can still tap into some courage and some bravery and some strength, and then do a thing at the same time, reinforcing that you are a victim, reinforcing that there's something or some bodies that are oppressing you. Then one, first off, it's reinforcing a losing point of identity. And two, it's reinforcing a relationship with society that will effectively render someone subordinate.
And powerless.
Powerless.
Yeah.
So for me, it was like, yo, this decolonizing work is really important because people are operating from colonial points of identity. So we need to name that squarely. We must decolonize our identity in addition to ancestralizing our identity. So, Bryce, for you, come up with some language that supports you deepening your work and also you can share with others. So my phrase was Detroit African. We put those two words together for myself. One, because the Detroit honors my indigeneity, even though that is a colonial word, and we really know that the name of this place is Wawiatanang. So ashe to the ancestors, ashe to the land, Wawiatanang. That's where we really are. Yet, just from a, keeping it present in the social context. Detroit.
Yes.
We all know this place is Detroit in a real way. So those of us who are indigenous to Detroit, it's a deeper relationship when we use the word indigenous versus I'm from there. So we honor.
It feels more spiritual.
It is more spiritual because it's honoring that there is essence, spirit, DNA from this land that is actually in you too. So, and that is a connection that is indelible and unalienable. Like you can't take that connection from someone. You can only make someone think they're disconnected.
Well, and what you're talking about, Bryce, and I really, really, this is resonating me in a profound way, because what you're highlighting is that what we focus on is what expands. How we see ourselves is how we think. How we think about ourselves is how we act, essentially. And so although history tells us that in many ways oppression has been a part of the fabric of our existence. If we focus only on that narrative without the rich history of where we came from, without understanding that resistance has always been present, without understanding why this extraction occurred, then we end up becoming apathetic and we believe that the system is working the way it was designed to. But even when we say that, is it really working the way it was designed to? Because our natural design says that this is actually not natural.
So boom, for me, it was very important to make a distinction in my own activism. In 2010 and a half, my first time experiencing East Michigan Environmental Action Council, Bryce is exposed to and encountering a lot of brilliant, very well-intentioned, heart-led people who are saying things, and this is like the global conversation around systemic, institutionalized racism, systemic oppression, blah, blah, blah. The way that the whole globe is having a conversation is we need to address this part of the system. We need to correct this part of the system. This part of the system doesn't work. That institution doesn't work. We need to do a thing. Essentially, we need to fix, remediate that shit. And Bryce is entering the space not from this world of justice. Like, yo, it's very clear. And this is me as a finance guy. Like my major is finance, corporate banking and finance. So the way that Bryce looks at all of this shit going on is as an architect and engineer and a social scientist. Everything that we see, every policy, every institution, every piece of infrastructure was intentionally designed to function this way. So for me, it is important to make a distinction. The systems, the institutions that our people are responding to as activists, responding to as revolutionists, that system is 1,000,000% designed to do exactly what it's doing.
But it goes against our human design.
Yes. So we need to name that piece. But our framework and our pedagogy and our strategies shift when we frame it correctly from, yo, this is artificial, this is unnatural, foreign. We can call this thing foreign. It's foreign to my nature. It's foreign to nature. So that thing is foreign now. There's no need for us to talk about how to address something foreign anymore. Let's focus our attention on creating the systems that are actually congruent and that come out of nature.
Yeah. This is so good. And in fact, as a licensed therapist, I'm a licensed therapist and I'm also a certified professional coach. And, and from a psychotherapy perspective, we believe we have to focus on the past to make sense of the present. In the coaching world, we say, tell me what you want to do with your life, and I'm going to help to lay the groundwork for you. And I feel like that's in part what you're saying, right? That we can focus on dismantling these systems, or we can curate a vision for the world that we want to create, and we can play a part in what that looks like.
Period.
So so much of your work also I'm hearing, I believe, and you tell me if I'm wrong, is about ensuring that individuals do the internal work necessary so that they can see themselves clearly, so that they can show up in space and do the divine work that's connected to their divinity.
Boom. Because that's the bottom line. You shared something with me, your daily mantra, Demarra, before we started this podcast. feel free to say it right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So the mantra for today was that the only thing that I need to focus on is my inner world. The only thing that matters is ultimately my inner world.
So boom, the factualness of that lines up with what we're talking about right now in this way. It is what goes on the inside of us. It's the self-image that we have in our imagination.
Yeah.
It's the definitions and how we qualify things. That internal reality is what we project outward. So if Bryce says Bryce is a winner or Bryce is victorious and Bryce is smart, then when Bryce goes out into the manifest realm, then Bryce is projecting himself into space as, well, I'm smart. I'm walking into the space where we're definitely brilliant. We're definitely handsome. Like we're projecting all this into the space. And then that informs how Bryce relates to everybody and nature.
Yes.
So,
and I love that you're saying and nature,
yes.
right? Because a lot of times when we're doing movement building work and we're working to change systems, we're not doing it in relationship to the greater context of the world.
Yes.
And that we are interconnected with all of it.
That part.
So I love that you emphasize that piece every step of the way. And that was one of the things that was illuminated, right, in your bio.
Yes.
And that's very connected to the environmental justice work that you do. Because
Absolutely.
you see all of it as connected to the whole.
Very much so. Part and parcel, which is how our ancestors look at things.
Yes.
Everything, we acknowledge that as highly spiritually literate peoples, we acknowledge that everything comes from source. One of my frameworks is spiritual agriculture. So from my spiritual agricultural framework, this all concept, the totality, the supreme, we look at that as soil. All the things come from the soil. All of this that is nature and the firmament comes from the soil. So it's easy for us projecting from that point of identity to always be present in our true relationship. Like we're truly interconnected.
Yeah.
We are truly individual parts of a whole.
And you know what just came in my spirit about this? I think about, soil as the base, right?
Yes.
It's the foundation.
Yep.
And if we're not doing work to support the foundation, if we haven't looked at the ways in which we think about ourselves and we think about the world and give ourselves an opportunity to think again.
Yes.
To derive the truth, right? And the truth is, as we talked about, that it's all divine. We are all divine.
Yes.
And if we see ourselves as divine, it doesn't matter how the world sees us necessarily, because we can choose not to focus on that.
Boom.
And the most powerful work, and I think that this is really fundamental to what you do, and we're going to get into it later, the most fundamental work that we can ever do is to mind the mind.
Period.
Is to mind the mind over and over and over and over again. And so oftentimes I hear people say things like, this is just the way that it is. Nobody's ever going to give me an opportunity. Why can't just people see the inherent value that I have? And it's like, well, why don't you see your own value?
Boom. Boom.
Because the minute that we start to see our own value and that we're worthy and that we really cultivate what it means to truly radically love thyself, we know that anything becomes possible from that place, no matter what the world has done to try to prevent us from getting it.
That part. And especially this other thing happens too, where all things incongruent become so viscerally unaligned. Like that's a big thing too. Being in right relationship with ourselves, we get to benefit from us ourselves as natural beings. One of the characteristics of us as being natural beings is we are magnets.
Yes.
So as much as we attract, and people love talking about the positive law of attraction, attract, we also repel. And when we're in right relationship with ourselves, we repel the bullshit.
So this is so good. So a couple years ago, and before we get into this next exploration, a coach that I was working with, because, I believe in this stuff. I talk about this stuff. It's my work, but it's my work too, right?
Yes.
And my coach said to me, Demarra, you got to stop putting so much energy in places where you're not supposed to put your energy. And that part of what you're inviting us to do is to be so clear about who we are that when we meet someone or we walk into a place or we go into a neighborhood or we're walking, it doesn't matter because it shows up all the time. And our energy is literally like, you can feel it.
You can feel it. Yes.
You can feel it. We don't always trust it.
Boom. That's
right?
the thing.
We may try to, insert ourselves.
Intellectualize the.
And then we end up hurting ourselves because we weren't supposed to be in communion with that person to begin with.
Boom.
We weren't supposed to be in that place to begin with. And so, and what you're inviting us to do is also to consider this reservoir of wisdom that exists right here in this body.
Ashe.
Right?
Yes.
It's the thing that tells us if we've eaten too much sugar.
Boom.
It's the thing that tells us when we need to release, right, through tears.
Yes.
It's the thing that tells us that it's time to rest, right? And because rest is a part of our healing. And so I know that we're going to go into more of the mechanics of how all this shows up for you. But I thought it was so important to make sure that we spent some time really, really illuminating that because that is the foundation for everything.
For everything.
Okay, King. So one of the things that I want to talk with you about is the first time that I met you, I was at the Eastern Market and you were speaking at this wellness summit. And you started talking about the importance of land conservation and particularly the connection with land ownership and working anti to gentrification, right? Yes. And you were actually wearing, it's become a part of your brand, you were wearing a sweatshirt that said, "Hood is closed to gentrifiers." Yes. I don't think it says hood. I think hood closed to gentrifiers is what it says.
Yes.
And so let's talk about the devastation really quickly on what gentrification has done to Detroit and how your work is interrupting gentrification within your neighborhood and beyond.
Boom. It's a very important question, so thank you for that.
Yeah.
I'm going to approach it like this. First, we want to be really clear about what gentrification is because there is still a significant population of people who think gentrification literally means beautification.
That's mind-blowing.
It is for me, but we all like on one level it's like what? But on another level we get it because of mainstream media narratives. Yet the thing that we want to distinguish right now, gentrification and beautification are two different words on purpose. On purpose. This is for all of our people who still will be like, yo, these are synonyms. They're not synonymous. Let me break down what gentrification really is. Gentrification, first off, it has roots in the 13th century, and it really became a device for how European aristocracy went about creating social order 15th, 16th, and 17th century. It really ramped up in a certain kind of way. Gentrification, bottom line, one, look at the root word, gentry. Gentry is a derivative or it's a variation of genteel. Genteel, speaking to genteel as a social character in France, which is where the gentrification that we are experiencing in modern day America, it was evolved in a significant way. 16th, 17th, 18th century France. Then you see some of that advancing in England. But the short of it is this. You have this class of people considered the genteel society. These are the landowners. These are the wealthy, quote unquote, the white men who have become wealthy through raping and stealing and pillaging. One characteristic of them, though, is they don't have to do work. So genteel society means I'm refined and I enjoy the finer things because I don't have to labor. This was a social class that existed underneath the aristocracy. So basically the nobles. The nobles were the genteel society. The way that genteel society was given land, the aristocracy would grant someone a noble. Like, okay, Demarra, you're a noble. We're going to grant you land over there. Now, the land we're granting you, people already live there.
Come on.
In a feudal state, there are peasants who already are over there. They're working the land. So what the aristocracy does, after granting you the land, we then hire off-duty military. We hire mercenaries to go clear the land for you. For you, the noble representing this preferred social class. So gentrification has always been, and it will always be, a technology that was developed from the aristocracy of a social strata. So this technology developed from the top as a mechanism for how to expand the colony.
Yeah.
Period. It's a colonial development technology, and it still plays out the exact same today. You have the modern day aristocracy, which is the city government. Another example of modern day aristocracy are corporations. You have a corporation like Bedrock. You have a corporation like GM, Ford. You have all these big corporations, Google. They have a vested interest in their employees having housing.
Yeah.
They are primarily the ones representing this new aristocracy. They're the ones who send out these, hey, like the noble class in a corporatocracy would be the executives and the upper management. So you have these corporations, Bedrock, sending out these calls, hey, upper management, move to Detroit. We're going to grant you land. And some of those grants, going back to policy and legislation, look like tax incentives. It looks like you can come up here and be incentivized $25,000 if you're a new homeowner not from Detroit. Like you get money to buy a home that someone was evicted from. So going back to the original question, how has gentrification really affected Detroit? Well, on a narrative level, first off, there had to be some stories told that painted the black leadership here as corrupt and inept. There had to be some stories painted here, stories told here that painted the people as ignorant, illiterate, and incapable of leading themselves. So not only is your leadership fucked up and on some bullshit, the people from which the new leadership could come are illiterate and they're poor and they're uneducated. So that was, even though when those stories first started rolling out, which is the mid to late 90s, we started to really get these stories ramping up. At that exact same time, Detroit had the #1, we were in the top 5 public school systems. We were experiencing almost 2 decades of surplus on the city budget side under black administration. So there were literally these negative narrative campaigns to paint a picture of this corrupt, black-led, dying city. That was one of the implications of gentrification, is the stories change. And the story changes to paint the city in a way that will drive down property values. In driving down property values, another implication of telling these negative stories is if you keep telling people that everybody there is bad, horrible, criminal, on some bullshit, as well as you telling people industry left and blah, 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 and the city ain't got no infrastructure or resources, what happens is people will begin to associate Detroit with a criminal population, one, that always needs policing, that always needs some type of enforcement to keep them in order. And two, people will start imagining Detroit as a post-apocalyptic place where new policies need to get on the books to explore how do we develop this frontier now, this new frontier. So gentrification has hit Detroit hard in terms of the narrative strategy around it for the past 20 years. That has definitely put black people in a disadvantage, continuing to paint them as in all those negative ways. Then on a policy tip, we've had corporations who have been able to use their lobbyists to make it easy to incentivize their employees from other places to move to Detroit.
Well, let me tell you, like, there's so much that
It's
is
a lot.
rumbling in me based on what you just shared, and one of which is that knowing where Detroit Public Schools was and now where it's at now.
Yes.
Right? So
After rounds of emergency management, which is essentially legislated pirating
and
of
money
city resources
taken away from city resources.
Yes.
And the situation is in a much worse off position.
Much worse.
When I literally just pulled some stats this morning in preparation for one of my interviews, and it broke my heart to see the fabric of this education system just crumbling, just crumbling. But to know that it didn't used to be this way.
Exactly.
And, you know, what's fascinating is that one of the things that has happened for me, and this is anecdotal, is that when I told people that I was moving to Detroit or that I live in Detroit, they're like, what? Why Detroit?
Yep.
Out of all the places that you can live in, I'm like, well, why not Detroit? So one of the things that I've been saying lately is that people are sleeping on Detroit, but I think that the reason why people are sleeping on Detroit is because they've been fed a narrative, one narrative,
correct,
that at one time was false.
Yep.
At one time was false.
Absolutely false.
But it became true, right? Because self-fulfilling prophecy is real, right?
Real,
You just talked about that.
Yes.
But also, I think that perception is so critically important because, you know, I don't know if I shared this with you. Before I moved here, I have family from Chicago, so I spent a lot of time in Chicago. But now that I'm here in Detroit, I don't have a reason to go to Chicago unless it's to see my uncle, to be quite honest.
That's real.
Everything that Chicago has, Detroit has, but Detroit has more.
Ashe.
And the flavor of Detroit is different.
Very much so.
And you've got the artistic feel, the murals, this edge that comes from the industrial aspect. Like, Detroit is its own beautiful microcosm.
Ashe.
And yet the world still doesn't know it.
They do, but how about this?
Because or they don't know it fully.
And this is where Bryce is going to make a distinction. There are two worlds. There's one world that is so aware of everything that Detroit is and has been. And then there's another world that only knows Detroit based on what mainstream media is telling them about Detroit. This first world is a corporate world. Everyone in the corporate world overstands, especially those people who are either relics from the 20th century or descendants from the industrialists of the 20th century. All of the industrialists in the 21st century who came out of the 20th century, we all know the importance of Detroit.
Well, you talk to any Detroiter, okay? You talk to any Detroiter. Listen, you better not say shit about Detroit.
Me,
okay?
You feel me? Exactly.
And I love that pride. And I feel like that pride is, we'd like to think that we all have that kind of pride for our cities. We rep our cities like that. I don't know anybody who reps their city like Detroiters, though.
No, for real.
Would you say that?
In real life.
And you've been everywhere.
Everywhere. The thing about Detroit, which is unique, is the blackness in Detroit is a particular technology, and we're supposed to be exporting it out, and we're supposed to be on a diplomatic tip, letting people know the same way that for Muslims, Mecca, you have to make a pilgrimage to Mecca. Every diasporic African, to me, must be diligent about making some pilgrimage to Detroit in their lifetime.
I love
for
that.
Real. For real.
I really, and you said, I'm laughing not because it's funny, but because it's like, right, this would be what a Detroiter would say. Like, like what didn't start in Detroit? Right,
that part,
of course.
No.
Like, what did Detroit not influence in some shape or form?
For real,
right?
for real.
What is it not shaping, even right now as we speak and we're having this conversation?
Exactly.
You
for
said
positive
Detroit
and
is
negative.
Technology.
Very much so.
Black Detroit is technology.
Period.
That needs to be on somebody's shirt.
Absolutely. Coming soon. Roadwork. Trademark.
I love that. I love that. Okay. So talk to me about now what your work is uniquely doing to interrupt that.
So for me, my entertainment justice practice and then building out this new entertainment justice industry. And then shout out my road work project for sure. For me, it's about this. The real way to disrupt colonial conventions is to first be operating outside of them on an individual self-identity level. While we use entertainment, because as a walking ancestor, we understand that entertainment is the art and science for basically putting thoughts and ideas into people's emotional body and into people's imagination. That is the professional industry for literally influencing identity and behavior. For us as diasporic Africans, as walking ancestors, we understand that that work exists in the priest class because we have the magic, we have the science, the knowing on how to make you think something about yourself that will influence how you actually be on earth.
Yes. Yes.
And we see what happens when it's used against us. When we're given weaponized points of identity for ourselves, self-destructive ones, then we literally actualize them out if we have no other scripts, no other images. So for Bryce, it's like, boom, work first starts on the individual. We need to make sure that our people are operating from a better point of identity.
Yes.
That's where entertainment comes in. That's where the programming, that's where the spectacle, that me as a producer, that's where Afrofuturism comes in. Because for me, Afrofuturism ain't shit but me bringing forward in the now the future that we're building. We're just evidencing it. So like, this is where we're going, y'all. So let's just materially build it out. This is the way we're going to talk about ourselves. So let's Bryce talk about ourselves like that now. Because in the future, 300 years from now, these will be defaults. But we need to practice these things now in order for them to be defaults there. So the first point of development must be the development of the individual self-image. From there, that's where we move to the next piece. Once we do programming that cultivates my people and makes their identity and their sense of pride and love for self, then we have people who feel invigorated and who approach challenges with optimism. They approach challenges as if this is something that we are supposed to do and overcome. Like, oh yeah, that ain't shit but growth. That's a growth moment. So for the programming in terms of me doing on a fashion aspect to the Roadwork Project, where you can buy a shirt, you can buy a patch, you can engage with the project in a way that affirms a certain point of identity. And in real life, everybody that buys a patch or a sticker or a sweatshirt or a t-shirt or whatever, or a lawn sign, that is cultivating the identity of being a custodian of your neighborhood, cultivating the identity of being a diplomat for your city, being one who's responsible for letting people know, like this,
Come on,
you know what I mean? But this is how we get down here. This is what we call ourselves. These are the rules. These are the customs. So that self-work, seeing yourself in your full beauty, helping each other see ourselves in our full beauty, using my entertainment, using my programming, using the design. And then from there, once we see ourselves like, okay, yep, we are strong, we are intelligent, we are not what the colonizer has been calling me, then it's like, all right, bet. Let me put this point of identity in front of you. Custodian. You are actually the custodian of your neighborhood. You're actually the designer, the architect of your built environment. So let me put some material culture out there that allows you to reinforce that point of identity. And then from reinforcing that point of identity, there are going to be those of us who are compelled to action. Some of that action might be simply yard work and cleaning up our space. Some of that action may be like, let me reach out to the land bank to buy this lot. How we get to being custodians and actually doing the designing and the building out of the built environment is first we must see ourselves as one, as that. But not even that first. First we must see ourselves, period. We got to see ourselves. Like Bryce got to see Demarra as the sacred divine being that you truly are, in order for me to even be like, you know what? We want to make sure that you're self-actualizing how you need to, because you are divine.
Well, and really, I so appreciate this framework, right? Because the way that you see the sacredness in me is when you see the sacredness in you.
Facts.
And if you can see the sacredness in you, you can see the sacredness in nature.
Boom.
then you're able to say, okay, I can step now fully into what it means to really be a leader over my entire life,
Boom.
over my neighborhood, over my community. And I am now fully responsible for my actions, irrespective to this place.
Yes.
And so when you've got one person doing that, we know that's powerful. But we know that one person, then it translates into their families. It translates into their neighborhood.
Yes.
It translates into the entire city.
Especially when you do it sexy. That's why Bryce chose to be in entertainment. We got to make this work look sexy.
Come on.
We got to make it beautiful.
We got to speak to the people the way the people want to be spoken to.
Period. That's it.
We got to speak to the people the way they want to be spoken to.
And we like honey. We like honey on the tongue more than we like bitter. You know what I mean? Like we all do. You know what I mean? We'd rather have a little bit of sweet than a little bit of sour. So it's like, all right, let's dress this thing up. We're going to make it as beautiful and spectacular as we are.
Yes.
Because the beauty and the spectacle and the radiance and the vibrance that we put into the cultural production, that is simply a reflection of us and our true nature, which is why beauty is important. Beauty is an imperative in all of our work.
Yes.
So that's me saying it to those folks who need to hear it, because sometimes we focus so much on the tactile and the pragmatic of the work that can end up being very linear, very black and white, very two-dimensional on paper.
Not very inspirational.
Period.
You know, I mean, you're really talking about breathing life into movement work.
Ashe.
And that beauty can be at the forefront, and joy can be at the forefront, and peace and flow and ease can be at the forefront of a revolution.
Let me tell it must be. Like we must, all of us, it's a particular exercise to develop our intellect and imagination to be ever evolving in sophistication. One of the points of sophistication in the 21st century is the way to be as straightforward and direct as possible, the way to be as emotionally impactful as possible, plus the way to be as beautiful as possible, the way to be as easily digestible as possible, plus educational and informative as possible. Like all of those things have to happen at the same, well, for me, that's my imperative. Like all these things must happen framework at the exact same time.
And this is why you're drawing in the people that you're drawing in. This is why people are saying, I want to enter into this space because there's something here for me. Right?
Yes.
And if people don't see that there's something there for them, no matter how good your idea is, and really you're talking about understanding how you influence, right? You're talking about curating your own influence.
Ashe.
Yep. And we've got to be able to package things in a way that people can see them, that they want to touch them, that they want to engage with them. And we talked earlier about how the arts in general, right? We're, you know, whether we're talking about music or we're talking dance or we're talking about, and we know these things are all very spiritual practices.
Very much so.
And there's a returning to, but making it fit within the culture.
Period.
Right? And having that be central to everything that you put out in the world.
Absolutely.
Okay, so you know we can keep talking, but we can't be
Forever.
in the studio all day.
That part,
right?
yes,
okay,
yes.
So let's talk about entertainment justice. You've really coined this term.
Absolutely.
Tell me if I'm wrong about that.
No, absolutely right.
This is you.
100% me. Yes.
And all your innovation.
Very much so. Yes, yes.
So talk to us about what entertainment justice means and how you using this frame has helped to alchemize community trauma.
So boom, entertainment justice at its core, it starts with an acknowledgement coming from me as a music industry professional. This acknowledgement that our entertainment industry is the industry within our social structuring that is responsible for influencing, informing identity, and developing behavior. It just so happens to do it on a consumer society level, but it's the entertainment industry that is responsible for producing and distributing all of the ideas that inform and influence how an American citizen is going to see themselves, as well as the way that they're going to relate to others in their environment. So boom. because Bryce was in that space for the first iteration of my career and my job as a chief production officer, chief marketing officer for this independent label, it was me creating the artist roster, came up with because my approach to my work has always been behavior science.
Yeah.
Always. This is me like 19, 20 years old coming into it like, you know what? Record production is behavior science, because in real life, my responsibility, Bryce is going to get judged on his ability to make a song and that song being able to change your emotional state from non-consumption to consumption.
Come on now.
Period. So that's behavior science, because my metrics are, did you move behavior? Did behavior shift because you put out that record? Yes or no? So boom. Being in that space and being very clear that myself, designing artists to be these corporate brand agents, these agents to be able to promote corporate brands, it's like, yo, we must have our own space, our own industrial infrastructure that's dedicated to influencing and informing identity, in particular, diasporic African identity, for the positive, healthy, ancestrally literate points of identity and lifestyle that will support us to self-actualize. Period. We need an entire industrial infrastructure for that, though, because Bryce is in an industry right now. We are in an industrial infrastructure that's dedicated to producing the death identities and the death behaviors. We need a life industry, one that's designed for the life behaviors. So that, for me, is like, all right, you have this ambition, Bryce, to be able to reach tens of millions of people every 24 hours with music. You know you can't use this infrastructure to do it because they're only going to promote certain frequency of information, certain narratives. Since it's still valuable to be able to reach millions of people, then you got to build your own machine, Bryce.
Yeah.
So since 2011, it's been me with 10.511, coin the phrase entertainment justice, and it's been me since then, basically like breaking down for myself, like what are the real components of a music industry, and then from there going about designing and developing those pieces so that we actually have our own infrastructure. And for me, leveraging the DNA of my city.
Yes.
Detroit, since the 20th century, has, on a global tip, we have in our DNA recording arts industry. Detroit had a crazy recording arts industry in the 20th century, such to the point it could produce a black recording arts industry.
Wow.
A lot of us who grew up in a majority black Detroit look at Motown as the beginning of Detroit's recording arts history. Not at all. Our industry, the infrastructure was so significant and substantial in Detroit that you could have black people enter that space and then build out economy for themselves. So in our DNA, we already have black music economy. In our neighborhoods, we still have these buildings. Some of these buildings, shout out to Apex Bar, that my nonprofit was able to acquire.
That's amazing.
And then shout out my people over there at Detroit Sound Conservancy. They were able to hold down the Bluebird Inn, and they're developing that space. So the point is, for me, even in that regard, we still have we have the remnants of that physical infrastructure. It is about, on an industrial tip, creating our own industrial infrastructure that is designed to create, produce, promote, and distribute entertainment media with positive points of diasporic African identity and lifestyle, so that we are taking control of how ourself and our people's behavior is designed and influenced.
You're a modern day Renaissance man. And all I could think about as you were talking about this is that ownership is at the core of everything that you do.
Ashe.
But it's ownership in connection with having a positive identity of who we are.
Yes.
And it's making me think a lot about the work of Malcolm X. Because so much of what Malcolm X stood for, and I recognize that he understood that Mecca was bigger than just Blackness.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And that we were connected to the people. Right? That was such a powerful moment of consciousness raising for him.
Yes, it was.
But he never faltered in his belief that we had to build our own. And that sometimes we can be so tenacious to get to the table.
Yes.
Somebody else's
table.
That we don't realize that if we try to move too quickly on this thing, then we'll still be left behind in the process. And we don't, and what you're inviting us to do is marry the two worlds of let's own, right? Because we need to own so that we can curate what we want to curate in the ways we want to curate it, and use it for financial independence, for our good, for the good of our communities. But let's do that in tandem while also tapping into the essence of who we are.
Period.
And I think that is what sets you apart, and that's in part why you call yourself somebody who does entertainment justice.
Ashe.
Right?
Yes.
Because it's not just about money, right? Ownership, so oftentimes we talk about it in the context of money. We're talking about this in the context of what a fabric of a community needs to be uplifted, to be enlightened, to be rooted, to be grounded.
Yes.
Okay, you know we can keep talking. Okay, all right. So you've worked internationally and locally curating music and cultural experiences.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm curious about how you see the role of music in not only healing trauma locally, but also creating a global movement for justice and empowerment.
So the music is vital because bottom line, music is frequency. This is my thinking, my approach, my practice. The griots, Bryce as griot. Bryce, through my narrative, through my stories, we are creating new frequencies. These new frequencies, once they are uttered, then they hit whoever is in proximity. It's when these frequencies hit your eardrums, that vibration that we call hearing or listening, that vibration is actually an energetic activity. So this new frequency inspires a new inspiration. It provokes a new inspired feeling, thought. It's from this new inspired feeling or thought, we get to look at it and we get to see what it's saying. That new inspired feeling or thought can compel a new action. It's these new actions that we choose to take, when we choose to take them, that create the new in our life, that create the new in our environment. So you asked me an initial question, and we approached it this way. What did you ask me?
Yeah, like how can the work that you do in terms of
the music, yes.
Yeah, and we know that curating music can help people with personal trauma, but how can it ultimately help create a global movement for justice and empowerment?
So one way is this, from my entertainment justice industry framework, we acknowledge this thing too. Coming out of the 20th century, the top of the 20th century, music has been used to sell things. Bottom line. Even the way the music companies were created, record labels essentially can be looked at as the marketing department of their parent company. So you have a Sony music and video distribution. Well, Sony's parent company, as a parent company, is straight technology. Straight technology. Military grade technology. They created a music and video distribution company so that is the media marketing department for all the goods and services that they sell. So when we see NBC, Universal, GE bought them at a certain point. and then another company bought them at a certain point. But that company bought a marketing department. We just call them entertainment industry. Those ain't shit but the marketing department for these parent companies. So how this ties into how music can be financial, economic stimulator on a micro scale of the individual all the way to the macro scale on the city, nation building. There are many new businesses now that exist. Triple bottom line, this, all black, that, everything. You know what I mean? Like we got so much good new economy stuff. We have a lot of new work, a lot of new economy, a lot of people doing new industry work. Awesome. The thing is this though, we can have a world full of new, healthy, awesome businesses. Yet if me as a consumer has not been conditioned first to consume with you, then none of those businesses are going to get patronized. You make it, if Demarra got a new Pepsi or a new soft drink that got honey, date syrup, no sugar, it's the best thing on earth. The bottle's made out of diamonds. I mean, it could be just amazing. Yet, if no one's ever telling me, if no one's using music to be like, dum dum, Demarra drink, but people are still using music to be like Pepsi, Coke, then Bryce is going to be, my consumer identity is going to continue to be cultivated by these people who are using music to influence me to buy their shit. So there's a very real part of the entertainment justice industry which looks necessarily at the consumer side.
Yeah.
We must be using the same way that music is in relationship to corporate America as the vehicle for selling things, then Bryce definitely looks at our relationship to music from an entertainment justice industry standpoint. We must also be using our music in corporate advertising ways to be selling the new political points of identity, the new cultural points of identity, as well as these new economic endeavors. So as much as we use the music spiritually to tell the stories that show us as the characters we aspire to be or need to be, then we also using this music to put in, go to the co-op.
Come on.
You know what I mean? To put in, we drop that boom, boom, boom at the Irwin Gallery, at the Irwin House, like we name drop, got my beads from Davos. Like when we put that in the song now, we're product placing our new economy.
And so this is like, and I know this is 101, but I imagine that for listeners and you know, I'm having this visceral reaction, like, of course, right? I hear that ditty. Of course I want to go out and buy that, right? Yep. It's not, maybe the visual, because it's beautiful, that might do it for me, but the music makes me want to look at it.
Yes.
It makes me want to pay attention to it a little bit more closely.
Yep.
It's going to land with me more because music is a universal language.
Yes.
So you're using it based on the universal language of Black people.
Ashe.
And where we came from and what's present for us right now and what's important and the messages, and you're controlling the message every single step of the way.
Absolutely.
So King, as we get ready to wrap up, for listeners who are feeling stuck, right? They're feeling stuck in what they witnessed in community. They're feeling stuck by their own personal trauma. They're feeling a sense of apathy based on the way that things have been, based on the way that they feel that they are right now.
Yeah.
What piece of inspiration can you impart to them?
This is going to be, right now, this podcast is happening in the harvest season. So we're in the fourth quarter, 2024. So this season is an auspicious time for taking self-inventory, counting the seeds, counting the harvest, like what did grow, what parts of myself did grow beautifully this year? What parts of myself did I want to grow but didn't actually put water on? What parts of me didn't need to grow but actually did grow? And now I'm still behaving in unproductive ways. The first thing is, even that exercise though, that exercise is instinctive for me because my identity is I am the observer of all the internal and external phenomenon in my reality. It is asking ourselves, anybody who's feeling stuck right now, my first thing to say to you would be ask yourself, who feels stuck? If I feel stuck, then that means I am operating from a point of identity that can be stuck. If I feel lost, then that means that I'm operating from a point of identity that can actually be lost. Bryce, it's in questioning, like, who is the one experiencing this thing? Am I experiencing this thing as some version of something society told me to do or taught me to be or conditioned me to see myself? Am I operating from a version of that, or am I actually operating rooted, grounded in my inherent beauty, brilliance, intelligences? Do that self-check first. Like, whoa, am I looking at this thing as the all-powerful, all-beautiful, all-knowing with the full capacities and abilities to transcend this thing? Is that how I'm looking at this thing? Or am I really looking at this thing as the defeated, the victimized, everything happens to me, I have no control, the best I can do is just hope for the least uncomfortable outcome? We got to check who is perceiving this thing. Who do I think I am in this moment? The reality is I am divine. I am that drop of the ocean that is the fucking ocean. I am that. I am that. I am not any character in a colonizer's narrative.
Yeah.
That is a real question.
You just gave us some affirmations, right? You just gave us some affirmations. And, you know, when you started, I'm sure some people were like, oh, my God, this is going way over my head. But what you're inviting, but you're a deep brother. So sometimes you're going to go over folks' head now. But what you're inviting us to do simply is to reframe what it is that we think is true.
Boom.
Right? Because if we believe we're stuck, we will be stuck.
Period.
If we believe that we're unattractive, we will never see someone who looks attractive in the mirror. If we believe that we're always going to be poor, then guess what? You will always be poor.
Period.
And so I think what you're inviting listeners to do is to just break it down, keep it simple. Know who you are.
Yes.
Know your divinity.
Yes.
Even saying things like, I am divine, I am loved, I'm a king,
yes.
I'm a priestess, I'm taking up my throne, I'm waiting for my wealth to come. It's here already.
Yes.
Right? Give me the foresight to know what action I need to take to do that. For listeners out there who are struggling, reframe. Reframe over and over and over again, and utilize affirmations to sink yourself into the truth of who you are.
And I'm going to add this last thing. The reason why the reframe and the affirm is so important is because every self-defeating, every self-conscious, every inferior thought about ourselves, that was implanted. None of that shit occurs naturally in our being. If you put a baby in an environment with no external stimuli, this media and negative narratives, they will never grow up thinking that they can't do a thing.
Not only that, they're going to be curious.
As a motherfucker.
They're going to be
all
creative.
Of these natural things will happen.
They're going to believe that the world is their oyster.
Period.
Right? They're going to believe that they're the shit.
And even if they don't believe that part, because on a level, you have to have that said to you too. But what they will never believe is that they're not supposed to have an organic, natural relationship with everything.
Come on.
They're never going to see themselves in a low way, because the same way it takes a certain script to see yourself highly, it takes a certain script to see yourself lowly.
That low vibration.
That low vibration. That shit is not
real.
Natural. It's given to us. So on a real simple tip, keep this in mind, y'all. When you are in these depressed, energetic moments, then do that quick inventory. Are these thoughts, are the sound of these thoughts, are they self-defeating? Are they fear-based? Are they anti-me? Is it anti my dreams? Is it anti my destiny? Then those thoughts did not come from me. Those thoughts were given to me from society.
This is so good. I read a whole chapter about abundance mindset in my book and using the emotional guidance scale, because what you just said is that, essentially when these emotions, these lower vibrational emotions come our way, it's an opportunity for us to learn something so that we can keep rising.
Boom.
Right? Because we are, as humans, supposed to experience a whole range of emotions.
Yes, we are.
But what we're not supposed to do is to sit in the low vibrational shit, because it
Period.
does harm to us and it harms the world inevitably.
Yes.
Bryce Detroit, you brought it. Ashe.
Appreciate
I
you,
end
Demarra.
every single talk with Ashe. Okay? And so this is one of the ways that we are definitely connected. I am so grateful. The audience, I'm sure, is grateful. We want to thank you for tuning in today. We hope sincerely that these insights shared have opened up new pathways towards your healing and liberation. If either one of us can be in touch with you, please don't hesitate to reach out. Let the folks know how they can stay in touch with you, Bryce.
Definitely at Bryce Detroit on the IG, the Twitter, social medias, DetroitRecordings.com, BryceDetroit.com. Yo, we here.
We in here.
we in here.
I love that. All right. So be sure to tune in for the 8 other episodes that we've got on the Alchemizing Trauma for Community Impact series and the 100 additional episodes that we have on the Be Well Beautiful podcast. If you found value in today's show us some love. You can do that on our YouTube page, on any podcast platform that you're listening on. And you are also welcome to send us an email directly to share what your experience has been at info@bewellbeautifulpeople.org. And if you haven't picked up my book yet, Me Too, A Therapist's Journey to Heal, Find Liberation and Joy, I invite you to do so at DemarraWest.com. You can use code Alchemizing to get 25% off. This particular series is being sponsored by the Love Building. It is a safe space for the creative and the social justice community. It's part of the Allied Media Project. We're also sponsored by HNB Building Services. Hit them up for all of your personal along with your commercial development needs that you might have, and the Lip Bar, which is dedicated to pulling out the beauty that already exists within you. We are going to leave you with the words of Beethoven. Music is the divine messenger between heaven and the human. Until next time, beautiful people. Ashe.